Brian Sanders, my friend, welcome to the Keto Camp podcast.
Hey Ben, how's it going?
It's going well. I'm excited for our conversation. I have been admiring your work. I love what you're doing to debunk a lot of myths, which we'll talk about today for quite some time. And I'm a big fan of your podcast, your YouTube channel, your films. You've got a new film coming out, which we'll talk about as well. And we met a couple of months ago, or a little over a month ago, at in Austin, where you live. We got to hang out for a bit, and I'm going to see you again in a few weeks at KetoCon in Austin. And I just love what you're doing, so I'm excited that you're on the show. And here's where I want to start, Brian. Your story, pain to purpose, man. I mean, oh my gosh, share a little bit about the challenges you had and what happened with your parents and what that did to raise questions for yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is a sad story and it's way too common, right? I think my parents had their health decline a little sooner than most, or maybe they were just older than most parents, but I was 30. I was about 30 years old. I lost both my parents. So huge impact to my life, devastating. They followed the food pyramid. We followed the food pyramid growing up. I never thought about health until I was about 30. I just thought, hey, we're doing it all right. We're following the guidelines. I was also pretty active. I was always playing sports, and I think I got away with a lot because how active I was. But then you turn 30 and you can't kind of eat whatever you want anymore. And, your metabolism, it doesn't slow down. Actually, that's a whole nother thing. It actually, you're less able to get away with things when
It
as the
becomes
older
it
you get.
becomes more inefficient, is more accurate to say, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and there's a great guy, Dr. Dave. Oh man, I'm not remembering his name right now, but who studies this, and he does a lot of the amazing research on aging and stuff, and found he did research with fruit flies and found that it's actually you just become less adapted to the modern diet as you get older, right? So you're less adapted to the modern processed diet and kind of bad lifestyle that we live as you grow older. So that's a whole nother story. But that all happened around 30 and big wake up call. My parents had basically prediabetes and no one told them it. They had all these other health conditions. No one really notified them. And then they ended up with Alzheimer's and cancer. So these are another of these chronic lifestyle diseases that actually a lot of people don't even realize are very diet and lifestyle oriented. Most people think obesity, type 2 diabetes, like GI stuff, all that type of stuff, but they don't realize that it's also Alzheimer's and cancers have a very big metabolic component. So yeah, woke me up, changed my life. I started getting into, I guess, Marxism, paleo, primal, like getting, like let's get rid of the sugar, flour, oil, these processed ingredients. And my life immediately changed. And so my friends were doing it. They kind of got me into it. And I saw they lost so much weight. Their body composition got so much better. And so I kind of credit them to getting me into it. And then I went down the rabbit hole since then, just read, hundreds of books, attended conferences, did all my interviews, started my whole, Peak Human podcast, did all that. And everything kind of went from there. But my quick personal health story was that, I was not obese. I said I was active and I kind of was always playing sports, but I had these common conditions that everyone thinks are normal. It's like, oh, dad bod, right? You turn 30, you have dad bod. I was heading that way. I saw all my other friends heading that way. I'm like, oh, this is how life is. I thought, oh, you have like GERD or, the acid reflux, like all this type of stuff. Always had that. I'm like, oh, that's just part of life. That's so funny. Haha. Yeah. You go and every, weekend you feel sick. That's so funny. That's me. Didn't know that wasn't supposed to be how humans live. I had like joint pain. I had chronic overuse injury pain just from using the computer that all went away when I changed my diet.
Wow.
I had body composition. Yeah, like I lost the dad bod. My allergies went away. Like my energy changed. I mean, you've heard these stories a million times. All the things that I thought were just part of aging went away, and I felt amazing. So that really, got me on this journey.
Yeah, it's amazing. And you're right. We need to redefine what aging should look like and feel like. It's mainstream will have you to believe that dad bod is normal and acid reflux is normal and gaining 5 pounds every year is normal. And it's not. It's common, yes, but normal, no. It's a big difference there. So I love how, Mark Sisson is a great inspiration to me. I love how his work inspired you to be obsessed now with understanding this information. Just doing that alone, what you said at the beginning, getting rid of sugar, flour, the bad oils, grains, like just doing those four things will get somebody in the right direction. And then they could explore more and uncover other areas. But I know that your mom is the one who had Alzheimer's. And from my studying of you, she had it, it was like for a year where she was kind of out of it. And then eventually she had passed away. And then your dad had cancer and they were young. They were in their 60s and 70s, right?
Yeah, actually, so almost correct. My mom's still around. She's in stage 7.
Oh, okay.
Stage 7 Alzheimer's, like, she somehow has been hanging around for so long, without being able to communicate, just in a just terrible state of this the very, very end stages of Alzheimer's.
How long? When was? How long ago was she diagnosed with Alzheimer's?
It was probably 8, 9 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, it's been so long, and now, yeah, so my dad passed away around 7 years ago, and, she is somehow still made it.
Your mom is a fighter. That's for sure.
I guess
That,
so.
that's incredible. And for me, I lost my dad in 2014 to
Mm,
the complications of diabetes, also lifestyle, standard American diet, food pyramid, and I never understood it as well. Right? It's like, oh, diabetes, genetics,
mhm,
and I'm thinking, oh, it's just a matter of time before I get it. Maybe I could slow it down, etc. And then my dad got sick, suffered a massive stroke, got paralyzed, and then 9 months later, my dad passed away. And it raised questions for me too. Like I followed all the conventional wisdom, made sure he had his insulin, made sure he had his medication, and he just got worse and worse and worse. And I remember, Brian, one of the doctor's appointments that I took my dad to, because I would take him to all his doctor's appointments, they said in order to help with this diabetes so we could manage it better, he needs to lose some weight.
mm,
And I said, okay, let's do that. And then I said, but aren't you giving him insulin? And doesn't insulin cause him to gain weight? And they didn't have an answer for me, and I didn't
mhm,
really seek the answer. And it didn't really make sense back then. But now that I look back, they were not trying to help my dad reverse the diabetes. They were trying to manage it. And the truth is, a cured patient is a lost customer. And that's just the fact of it. So if we're not taking our health serious, if we're treating our health casually, we end up a casualty. And that's why the work that you're doing in a conversation like this one that we're having
mhm,
right now empowers and inspires people. But let's continue with this because
mhm.
you then changed your life. And at what point did you decide to start studying agriculture and regenerative farming and creating films to bring awareness to what's happening out there?
Yeah, wow, it was a few years later, and I just kept seeing improvements, and I got more and more into it, and it's actually when I saw What the Health. So What the Health was 5 years ago. It was in the summer, I believe, 5 years ago, saw it, and it just made me mad because it was almost the antithesis of everything that I knew to be true. It's like how I got healthy was I started eating more animal foods, and I cut the highly processed foods and the, refined grains and sugars. And they're talking about doing the opposite. They're like, "Oh, we need to get rid of the animal." It's absurd, right? And they do all the bogus environmental arguments as well. So I already started learning about the environmental side, right? Once I started learning about the health side, uh, so that was years previous. But then once I saw that film, I got I mean, basically, I quit my job and just decided to not go the normal route. I was an engineer, I was a mechanical engineer, I was in tech for a while, so I had these careers that were great, but they didn't sort of satisfy me in the same way, and, left that behind and just went with my savings and just started interviewing people, started the film Food Lies, and basically even started a company around it. I started my nose to tail company because once I learned so much about regenerative agriculture, I decided instead of having sponsors to anything I do, I can just be my own sponsor and support local ranches here in Texas. And then it's a win-win, and I don't have to be affiliated with any other companies and can just kind of stay free, which I think is good because I'm trying to make this film. I'm really taking this unbiased approach as much as possible, and I don't want people saying, "Oh, but that guy's like taking money from the food industry, or he's part of like big ag or something." Like, no, I'm not. I'm completely unaffiliated. I don't take any money from any other companies. So that kind of led me down the road, and it's been a 5-year journey trying to put this film together.
And Food Lies is the film, and you have different series, and you have a whole set of new series coming out regarding it. Share a little bit about Food Lies, where my audience could learn more about it, and then share a little bit after that with these propaganda films. You mentioned What the Health and
Mhm,
Game Changers, which you made videos kind of debunking it.
mhm.
Share the challenges that the common person has when these films come out. But first, talk about Food Lies,
Food
and
Li
then
yeah.
talk about the challenges.
Yeah, so Food Lies is my main project. It turned into a six-part series, and we're going high end, we're going all out. I did make a Game Changers Debunked film, which we just made in 3 weeks, and we threw it up on YouTube because we wanted to debunk the Game Changers film and, do it quickly and not wait for a whole production. So, we're doing a full-on production that is taking 5 years and is taking a lot of money and a lot of time, and a lot of people are wondering where it is, but, that's how long it takes to do something quality. Game Changers took 5 years and took, well, millions of dollars, really. It took
Mm,
James Cameron and all these celebrities like Arnold Schwarzenegger and stuff, coming together on it, and we're just doing it with me and a guy I grew up with in Hawaii, who's amazing director and editor. So we're doing it together. We're kinda making the ultimate answer to all of the propaganda films. So it's not like a anti-vegan film, it's not an anti like What the Health film or Game Changers film. It's just the answer. It gives the other side of the story and it puts it all in one place. So guys like me and you, people who are listening to this podcast are in the top 1% of people that seek out this information and are probably very knowledgeable compared to the general public, right? So I
mhm.
don't expect them to know all this stuff that the people listening would know. We need to get it all in one place and into a digestible format of great audio visual, entertaining, informative piece for them to have this knowledge because it's not going to happen any other way. Like this. It's not like you could just tell someone, "Oh yeah, just go read The Big Fat Surprise by Nina Teicholz." It's like 350 pages and has like 1,000 references. No one's going to do that. I'll
Yeah,
do it. You'll do it. But we you need something entertaining, you need something fun and engaging, and it needs to be on Netflix, right? So that's our whole goal is get on Netflix, and we're going to great lengths to do so. I actually sent you the intro to that to let you
yeah.
know what we're doing here.
The intro is absolutely incredible. I mean, I watched it right before earlier today, and I was just it's so well done. And that's not even complete yet. You're going to actually premiere the complete intro trailer at KetoCon, but the one you sent me was absolutely incredible. And we need that. We need a film because you're right. I could tell people go read The Big Fat Surprise, go listen to my interview with Nina, go listen to Brian's interview with Nina or this person, and maybe they'll do that. They'll start the book and stop. Maybe they'll listen to the interview, but it's not enough. If we could send them to a film, hey, go watch Food Lies on Netflix. And that right there, entertainment, education, and that's how the Game Changers and the What the Health has fooled so many people. They're smart and you're doing what they did. They're getting to where people are consuming content. And I think that's really smart. So how can you, what are the loopholes or what are the challenges with getting it on Netflix? How can you get it on there?
Mm. Well, first, you have to make it Netflix quality. So that's why I wanted to show you the intro before we talk today to let you know that we're doing Netflix quality. We're going
That's
above
Netflix
and
quality.
yeah,
Yeah.
we're going above and beyond. I just tell you, it the first version of that, just half of the scenes took us 3 months to shoot. We hand shot each of those scenes. Not every single scene.
Wow.
You can see some of them were obviously like we didn't shoot, but all the ones that look like we shot those. We set them up. We got a studio. We handmade each item. There's a wheel. Like one of the lines is I didn't just wake up one day and quit my job and decide to make a food documentary. And we even have a wheel, those little wheels that, like Wheel of Fortune type things, and it had
Yeah.
all these different occupations, like become a carpenter, like become a chef, and it said make a food documentary, and it had like we made each thing for this to let people to draw people in, right? Those first few minutes when you find something on Netflix matter,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
we're like, we need to capture people. And we tell a good story too of why you need to watch this. We kind of give some of the content that we're going to talk about in it and give it's like a real intro. It's giving you a recap of what we're going to do, and I think it's all worth it.
It is, and I can't wait for that to be out, and it's going to be on Netflix. The quality is Netflix quality, absolutely. Let's share a little bit about some of the things you've uncovered, the food lies, if you will. Let's start with the whole argument that cows are creating pollution towards the earth, contributing to global warming, and how we need to cut back on our meat consumption to save the planet. Let's talk about that. What are the flaws in that argument?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's kind of 3 main arguments people may know that the vegans or the anti-meat activists use, and it's environmental, the nutritional, and the ethical. So we can
Hmm.
kinda cover all those, and we do all those in the film. So the environmental side, I mean, if you think about it from the highest level, it's pretty absurd that you are blaming if you picture some cattle in a field, this is the most natural thing to Earth. This is why the Earth exists the way it is, why we have these grassland ecosystems is because we have ruminants on grass, producing manure, chomping on the grass to stimulate it to cut it back and then come around at another time and have it grow back and then chew it all over again. And these systems that uh, nature has, right? Mother Nature's is it's basically it's like a miracle how they work, and they're all these harmonious systems. And it's it's when you start at the highest level, you can realize that there must be some propaganda, there must be some misinformation going on. If you're trying to blame the world's problem on the cow in the field, I mean, some people don't step back and like think about that, right? You're just like, wait a second, you're blaming it on that?
Yeah.
And then I'm like, "Yeah." Then people will say, "Oh, okay, well, we're talking about the feedlots." I'm like, "Okay, now we're starting to have some, better conversation here." Yes,
Hmm.
we don't wanna put them on the dirt and, crowd them in a feedlot and then feed them grains, but there's actually some efficiency to that, so I don't wanna support it, but, I mean, they're not just using all of these products just straight from the field. It's like they get used like the corn gets used for ethanol, so they make the biofuels, they make the ethanol, and then the cows get the leftovers. They can get distillers yeast, they can get all of the distillers leftovers that made beer or vodka, give it to the cows. It's actually a good system. So that if you're talking about methane from cows, there would have been a lot of methane if we just let those products go to waste. If we just put them in a landfill, that would create a lot of methane. So the cows can eat it, and then they fatten up quickly, and it's pretty efficient, but I mean, definitely not ideal. But then
Yeah.
they do produce some methane. But I mean, you could go on forever about this. I like to use the higher level arguments that people can just visualize in their head, and you don't have to get into the science because there's tons of other people doing the science and Frank Mitloner and doing all the studies to show why this environmental stuff is wrong. But with the methane argument, there's a methane cycle that is basically the above ground cycle where it's a natural cycle where plants get CO2 from the atmosphere, and then cows eat them and they actually do more burping. It's not farting, it's burping. And then that goes up into the atmosphere, and then it turns back into CO2 within 10 years and then comes back down into the plants. So it's just this harmonious cycle that happens, right? This is how the earth's always existed. There's always been methane coming from ruminant animals. There's methane from horses. There's methane from humans.
Hmm.
Humans produce gas. There's always this methane, but it just goes up, comes back down. It's part of the natural system. What people don't understand is there's a huge smoke screen. There's a huge diversion going on that the big industry, the fossil fuel industries, are these are the ones pushing this message. They're like, blame the cows, blame the cows. And you're like, wait a second, 95% of of all of the emissions problems are from the other industries, right? It's like it's such a diversion tactic to blame it on the cow when the so in these other industries, so the opposite to this harmonious cycle of the methane going up in the atmosphere and coming back down is the fossil fuel industry, which is extracting carbon from deep in the ground, extracting oil, and any kind of energy takes um, inputs from the ground, and then it's basically burning them and putting it up into the atmosphere. So that's a one-way street, right? So that's we're taking carbon that was buried deep in the ground that wasn't, around, and putting it up into the atmosphere, and especially particulate matter, right? That's what people should care about. You don't want like actual pollution. Uh, so that's the real problem. That is very different from the natural methane cycle, and that's where we should be focused on. But big industry is the one that's controlling this narrative, and they don't want you focused on that. because it's way easier to just blame the cow.
So that's the number one problem you're saying. It's the fossil fuel production.
Yeah, and big industry and anything around it, like, yeah, it's kind of obvious to people if you think about it. It's like people know, like, taking one plane ride would do. You could eat, like, yeah, the amount of, I forget the statistics. Like, if you there was a reasonable amount of meat someone ate over a course of a year, and it was only equal to 1/6 of one plane ride,
Wow, that's
right?
it's so funny and sad because you have these uh, billionaires, millionaires, and I'm not against being a billionaire or a millionaire at all,
Mhm.
but they fly on their private jets and they preach this message of carbon emissions and global warming, and yet they're flying on those jets, which is causing much more problems than eating meat. To your point here, such hypocrisy, isn't it?
It is, but this is how big business works. So most of the environmental stuff is really just this shifting of the blame, right? And then meat is the scapegoat. It's actually kind of a scapegoat for all of the problems. If you're talking about nutritional and even you
Mhm.
could say ethical, is that this is why you've only heard this message. And I mean, you've, as in the mainstream population, people always like, oh, well, why is everyone so coordinated on this? And why is it that well, it's because all of the industries are based on this. It's like we talked about the sick care industry and the pharmaceutical companies and the doctors. That whole system is set up just as management, right? It's disease management. It's not fixing it. There, who are they funded by? Like it all works together, right? The big food companies, the textbooks that are written, the dietitians, the people doing the research, it's all the same funding that goes to perpetuate these systems. And that's how big systems work. They need to be perpetuated. They need money. They need to grow. They need to keep the status quo. So they keep it works out for them to keep these messages in the public.
Yeah, it does. And you're right. The writing is on the wall. If you do a little bit of some research and create some awareness, the writing is on the wall. For example, you go to your grocery store right now and you go to the section where there's cooking oils. We know how inflammatory seed oils are, canola, soybean, etc. They're highly inflammatory. The research is out there. And you see a stamp of approval from the American Heart Association, right? You see a stamp of approval from these government funded companies, big pharma, big food companies, and you wonder how are they putting that stamp of approval. I remember asking Dr. Kay Shanahan, who I know you've interviewed
Mhm,
her before, about that, and she says, well, Ben, the American Heart Association is the biggest propaganda fake news organization in the United States. She tells me they pay for this research hundreds of millions of dollars each year to fund this research. And it's like, oh my gosh, that makes sense. It's so much propaganda, and it's so challenging to the average person who just wants to eat healthy, and their doctor tells them eat the canola, eat the
mhm,
plant-based burger. It's just so challenging. So your film is going to be such no pun intended, it's going to be a game
game
changer
changer.
because it's going to change so many lives, and it's going to help them get educated in an entertaining way. I want to stay on this topic, Brian, of
Mhm,
meat. um, I know you're a big fan of protein consumption, protein, nutrients
mhm.
versus carbs and fat. Explain that breakdown and why you believe the reason we see this obesity is because of a protein deficiency.
Yeah, I love this. So we do that in the film. For one, we do break down a lot of that stuff in the film, like how that AHA got started and the funding and all that stuff.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and we're telling all these stories. And another story you bring up is exactly right. Is it's I call it the we call it the nutrient to energy type of thing. There's a guy, Dr. Ted Naiman, people
Yeah.
probably are aware of him. You probably interviewed him, but he has a protein to energy thing. We're saying it's nutrient to energy because protein is a nutrient. So you're exactly right. It's protein and nutrients are on one side. These are your building blocks, right? This is what's and includes vitamins, minerals, essential fatty acids, right? So you basically nutrition is just these things. It's the essential building blocks, all the nutrients, proteins, vitamins, minerals, and then it's energy, which is fat or carbs, right? And yes, some of these fats have essential nutrients as well, but we'll just group them like this. And really, having a good diet and a good body composition is basically just a balance between these two things, nutrient and energy. And Dr. Ted goes into great detail on this, and he's in the film explaining this well. Dr. Kate's in the film as well,
Oh,
doing her
cool.
thing. We got all the big hitters here, but protein and nutrients to energy is such an important concept because all mammals, really all animals, all life forms basically acquire food to get the building blocks, right? And for all of history, the amount of energy that comes with those nutrients and protein and building blocks has always balanced and has always been in the correct ratio, right? And this gets into the protein leverage hypothesis, which has been studied, and they've studied it in all different animals. They've gone down to crickets, they've done mice, rodents, up to humans, and that mammals and all animals really will eat to get a certain amount of protein or nutrients. And if their food supply is diluted of protein, so if it doesn't have enough, so they can do these experiments very easily with rodents or with crickets or grass, different animals. You just give them a food that is low in protein, and then they just have to eat more of it to get the protein they need, right? And so then they will gain weight. And it's pretty simple, and they've done all different versions of these tests, and humans are no different. So it kind of makes sense when you look at a population and over the course of us becoming obese and sick in, say, since 1980, that's when the big uptick is. That you've probably seen those graphs where it's a sharp uptick in 1980, which was when the dietary guidelines were introduced.
Yeah.
Not a coincidence, but the protein of the population has dropped since then. So it's dramatically dropped. And if you do the math, you actually see that if you drop the protein in a population, they'll have to eat more calories as a result. And it kind of corresponds with how overweight everyone's gotten. So yes, there's more to it too with the seed oils and inflammatory, and there's all this other stuff going on. But I think it's really interesting that you could just even see what went wrong at a world level when you're eating low protein. And then I think we definitely need to include nutrients into that because protein is fine, right? It's like, yes, you could be a bodybuilding bro and just take protein shakes and eat egg whites, but there's more to the story, right? Because those guys aren't after amazing health and an amazing immune system and longevity. They're after getting muscles. And so you need to look beyond just protein. And I've gotten big into all the nutrients, vitamins, minerals. There's so much that goes on that it's hard to study and it's hard to see in your body too, right? And so some of it is it's a bit of a soft science, and it takes some self experimentation, and it takes, you know, changing your diet on your own to see these results. And I don't know if we're going to have good studies. There's guy Dr. Stefan von Vliet that's looking into the metabolomics and getting into these details of nutrient density and what these foods provide other than just macronutrients, right? There's so many micros, but it's hard to do these studies. So to go back to my personal story, I've seen an amazing change in my health and immune system and all this by eating for nutrient density, right? So not just thinking about protein, although I do think about protein, and also protein comes along with the nutrients and nutrients come along with the protein, right? They go hand in hand, especially animal-based protein. And since I've changed my diet and sort of doubled down on the animal foods and got rid of most of the processed foods, I haven't gotten sick in 7 years. Like, nothing's happened since I was started my journey. Maybe I did in the first year, that's why I say 7, not 8, because I guess my journey's been 8 years. Like, I just can't get sick. It's just my immune system, I'm just running on a whole different level. And I think especially the past 2 years, people are getting exposed for their diet and lifestyle, and that, people are getting sick because they're getting worse outcomes with COVID because they are not immune healthy. They are not, they're basically not living the ideal diet and lifestyle, obviously. So, it's just so hard to gauge these things, right? It's like we can put it together all these anecdotes. Like, I don't know if you have this experience or people or just how to even quantify um, this health gain that you've had since changing your diet.
Yeah, and it's unique to the person, right? So it's hard to do it in a study because there's a lot of variables. But to your point about your immune system being rock
Mm.
solid and not getting sick, it's not that Brian is in a bubble and not going out and exposing his immune system to other bacteria and viruses. He might be getting infected, but his immune system is so working so properly, it doesn't allow it to he doesn't allow his body to get sick. It deals with it right away, and that's what you want. You want a healthy immune system that does that, and that's what we don't have as an American population, and why we see so many people getting sick, especially those who are obese and insulin resistance, etc. And it's interesting because, yeah, in 1980, the food pyramid came out, and then obesity rises, protein consumption goes down. And of course, that's when we start applications of glyphosate as well, and all these pesticides and herbicides that goes up, which is problematic as well. So there's a lot of variables there. But when you look at what people are eating, standard American diet, going to their grocery store, packaged foods, what do they all have in common? As you know, Brian, they're very low in protein. They're high in fat, maybe, and carbs and seed oils and sugar, but low in protein. And that's why, and I agree with you, people are overeating to get that protein requirement. Where if they just shifted, okay, no more packaged food, let me eat actual meat that has natural fat with it. It's so satiating. And that's something that I teach my students in my Keto Camp Academy all the time. Once I get them into ketosis and they're fat adapted, let's prioritize protein. Let's activate cholecystokinin, leptin, peptide YY, these satiety hormones, because it's very difficult to overeat with protein. If you ate a 16-ounce steak, ribeye at your restaurant, and they're like, "We're giving you another free steak," no, there's no way I could eat that. They bring you some dessert, sure, because it doesn't activate those same satiety hormones and chemicals, but that protein requirement. Let me ask you this: I know it's hard to give the answer here, but what
Mhm.
would be a general recommendation for how much protein the average person should be eating each day?
Yeah, this is up for debate. I like to get close to a gram, per pound of body weight, or you could say a per pound of lean body mass. Like,
Okay.
I like to get up there because I don't see any downsides. I've interviewed a lot of protein researchers, and a lot of people may have heard, "Oh, it's bad for kidneys. Oh, it's bad for this." I've interviewed a lot of these top scientists. It's not true. I mean, if you already have like a severe kidney problem, then there's a chance that there may be something. But for the general public, there's nothing in the science that says that you should be limiting protein. So I think
Unless you're doing high protein and high carbs, then that could be problematic. But if you're just doing high protein and fat,
Oh yeah, if you're eating high protein and high processed foods, yeah, then that could be a problem. Absolutely. That's kind of like where all of our idea of what's wrong comes from, is because people are eating high meat, but they're also eating high processed foods, and then the meat
correct.
gets blamed. So yes, it's not the meat, it's what else you eat. That's a shirt I made. So
Okay.
yeah. Yeah. So wait. So yeah, what was the question?
You already answered it. 1 gram of
Oh,
protein
okay.
per
Yeah.
pound of lean body weight, right? So if somebody's ideal weight is like 130 pounds, you're saying most days consume 130 grams of protein.
Absolutely, and use that satiety that lever right there. Absolutely, I'm big on the satiety thing, and I think there's this concept that I've been playing around with Dr. Ted for a while. I kind of pitched this idea of satiety per calorie to him, and I don't know if you've seen his work lately. He's kind of made some cool graphics about it,
I
but I
haven't
think
seen
that,
it.
oh, it's so interesting. So it's satiety per calorie. So what I said is that throughout history, we've gotten protein and nutrients from whole foods, and that they've come with the correct amount of energy along with it. Right? It's like, if it's just naturally come with the right amount of energy, and then now we have all these processed foods, and they're basically low in protein, stuffed with extra energy, extra fats, carbs, refined food, sugars, grains, and that's when we have the problem, right? So this is the satiety to calorie concept is basically built on that. Is that if you all basically all whole foods and mostly animal foods and protein foods have the correct satiety per calorie, right? So I don't like looking at calories, right? I think it's kind of meaningless. But it's like you eat a 60-ounce steak. Who care? I have zero care how many calories are in that steak, because I know if I'm eating that amount of food, the satiety will match the amount of calories. So I'm going to be full for the correct amount of time. Okay. The opposite would be a glass of orange juice or something, apple juice. So this does not provide satiety, but it provides all the calories, right? So does that make sense? And then something in
Yeah.
between would be like a bowl of pasta. So it has some satiety, but it's not going to keep you full. Like, that's the whole joke. You eat the Chinese food and you're hungry an hour later. It's just a bunch of empty carbs
Yep.
and seed oils, right?
Yep.
So I think I'm trying to get it, like, I try to post or talk about this idea more. It's a bit like complicated to talk about the satiety for calories per calorie, and it sounds a little mathematic. But what it means is whole foods, especially the protein and animal foods, they keep you full properly. They keep you full for the right amount of time. They have the right amount of satiety to calories. The more processed food you have, or the more processed the ingredients are, the less satiety they have, but they still have the same amount of calories,
Yeah.
right? So I think this is kind of like explains a lot. It's like like why are processed food bad? Why do people overeat? It kind of ties together all the protein leverage hypothesis, all the nutrient leverage hypothesis, all this stuff together. It's, well, if you're eating foods that are highly processed, you're missing out on the good protein and nutrients and vitamins and minerals that will keep you full and what your body needs, and you're getting too much energy, whether it be fat or carbs, and that's where you run into a problem. And that's why people overeat. I always say, people, no one wants to be overweight. No one wants to be fat or sick, yet it's happened. So
Yeah.
it's why. It's why. It's why. You can't just say eat less, move more. Like, no one can eat less and move more. Why can they not? You got to go to the why,
Yeah.
right? Why? It's because there's the food is changed. That's why 1980 there's an uptick, because they gave us different food recommendations. Something has changed, and we need to think about that. So it's why. It's because the foods don't have the same satiety per calorie. They don't have the same, basically nutrient value, and it's not what our body expects that we've survived on throughout history.
Makes total sense to me. It really does. And just from my own experiments doing 30 days of carnivore, 40 days of carnivore, where it's just animal based protein, I find myself naturally eating less just because I'm so full, and I'll do either one meal or two meals, no snacking. I'm just so satiated. And not just me, I've taken a lot of my students through
Mhm,
30 days of carnivore, and they all report the same thing. Ben, I find myself doing one meal a day or two meals, and my sugar cravings are gone. I no longer need a snack. It's just the protein is so satiating. And it's going to be unique to find that threshold. But I completely agree. But let me make some arguments now.
mhm,
Let's see you
mhm,
the argument against animal-based protein. There's a few. You already spoke about the protein and the kidneys. No
mhm,
concern there. The research is clear. Unless you have a history of kidney disease or active something going on with your kidney, maybe you should be cautious.
mhm,
But if you don't, you're good.
mhm.
What about the link between red meat and cancer, and then the link between eating a lot of animal-based protein and uric acid levels rising?
Yeah, so cancer, so I actually interviewed Dr. David Klurfeld, who was on the WHO working group in 2015 that made that decision,
Huh.
that meat causes
Interesting.
cancer, right? So this is this famous thing. It's the one and only study or piece of research that said it, and it was a group put together by the WHO. And Dr. David Klurfeld was a USDA scientist. He's just a reasonable guy. He's not like some carnivore or anything. He's just total like mainstream scientist, but he was the one sticking up for the truth. And he said, I got special clearance to interview him. And he said the whole panel was a bunch of vegans and vegetarians, and that they had an agenda that I think the WHO has an agenda to push this plant-based narrative. And you can ask why, and that's for another time. But I think there definitely is this sort of kind of worldwide agenda. And that's what I'm speaking on at KetoCon, is the kind of what is with the worldwide agenda against meat, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I kind of like get into to why it's happening. But he basically said it. He's like, yeah, it was a biased group of people that were there to just make meat seem like it caused cancer. And he brought different studies to the table, and they ignored them. He's like, well, here's, you guys are just using epidemiology. You guys are using food questionnaires and all this stuff. He brought, actual RCTs, and there's not that many of them. And he brought some studies to the table, and they threw them out. They didn't use them. And so he, I mean, you
And
should listen to.
RCTs are random control trials for those who are wondering, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's a gold standard. They didn't use them. Epidemiology can't show causation; it can only show correlation. So now we have the whole world believing that red meat caused cancer because this biased group of people got together and basically made it that way.
Jeez.
So yeah, there is no, and I even push back on processed meat. So they say red meat likely causes cancer, and that like 20, and that processed meat does. And I think it's more to do with the correlation between when more people are eating way more processed foods with processed meat, right? Like if you're eating a hot dog, people are eating a bun. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like I get it. When people are eating a steak, maybe they're not eating a bun. So there's less of a correlation of just the bad habits and the bad diet that go along with it. So I think if you're eating a sausage, like I make good sausage at Nose to Tail. Like I buy good sausage from farmers. It's just meat.
Hmm.
Right? It's
Yeah.
just meat in a in a convenient form.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there's so much confusion out there. Just the other day, yesterday, as a matter of fact, I posted a video on my TikTok, a little 30-second video, and someone comments, the real problem is why we have obesity and disease is because of meat and dairy. And I'm like, actually, quality meat is very healing to the body, is what I wrote back. And he goes, no credible doctor or scientist will say that. And I said, actually, I've interviewed over 400 and they all agreed to that. It's like, come on, people, we need to get the truth out there. But kudos to the vegan industry, because they do a really good job at marketing. Kevin
Yeah.
Hart, the comedian's coming out with this new fast food chain of like plant-based burgers. You got Bill Gates, you got a Game Changers. They do a really good job. So it's hard to keep up with their funding and all that. And where do you see this going? Where do you see this? Because
Oh
there's a
man.
there's a huge movement with the vegan plant-based movement. Where is this going in the next 5 years?
I think it's going to scary places. That's why I'm trying to push back because I see that all the World Health Organizations are involved and the UN and the Eat Lancet. If people know what the Eat Lancet, and they form these big partnerships with big food companies. And if you look at who's funding the Eat Lancet and who's part of it, it's this group called Fresh, and it's a huge conglomeration of worldwide processed food companies. And they choose Lancet, which is a huge, supposedly respectable journal, right? And they're the ones putting out these planetary health diets where you can eat 7 grams of red meat. And, it's like, it's a basically a almost vegan diet that really the countries that are currently eating as little meat as they suggest have 30 to 40% child malnourishment and stunted growth. Like,
Jeez.
imagine that. So Dr. Frederick Leroy studies this, and he writes a lot of papers. And I interviewed him recently, and he put out this graphic showing like the planetary health diet put out by Eat Lancet and all these conglomeration of big food companies around the world, WHO, all these people are part of this, and he graphs it to the worldwide level of meat consumption, and at the level they're talking about, it's all the countries that have stunted growth and malnourishment. It's insane. So some people, it's hard for people to believe, like the vegan guys on the internet will say, oh yeah, well everyone agrees, or like what, like no, whatever statements you've heard. It's hard because there is this worldwide force against us, and they do good marketing, and they're very clever, and they have a lot of money. And I think a lot of it is to, yeah, kind of control the whole food system, really, right? And there's you can't control individual farmers making meat and getting it to producers. You can't that there's no profit margin to be made. I think a lot of it's about the profit margin, actually. So
Yeah.
there's barely any profit margin in milk, eggs, fish, any fresh foods. There's very little profit margin, or all the profits is in the processing. So that's why I think this whole vegan agenda is really coming from, is it's being pushed forward by the big companies and the big world powers, because for one, they have so much money and there's so much money to be made off it. And they kind of like hijack the animal rights activists, and the animal rights activists kind of like have just fallen in line unknowingly. But it really comes down to the profit margins, and that's where it all is. And I mean, just okay, in 1980 when the dietary guidelines came out, we started having the low fat thing. And that gave the green light to the food industry, and they just really adopted this. Oh, low fat's bad. Okay, let's make all these processed foods, and they made a whole bunch of money, right? Then that ran its course. Now the new one is the plant-based thing. So it's like, not only because they still had animal foods, they would just do low-fat yogurt. Like, oh, we'll just take the fat out of the yogurt, but at least people still got animal-based good proteins and nutrition. Now it's getting even worse. It's like we can make even more money and even more profit margin off if we could take all the animal foods out of it, because it's the most expensive part, and protein's always the most expensive. So we can have the ultimate cheap fake food to sell people. And you ask where it's going. I mean, it looks like it's going to, like, sort of like a social credit score type of thing, where I'm just really afraid of there being, like, there's taxes. They're talking about meat taxes or carbon tax, or they already have, even with junk food. I don't like the idea of taxing, like there's a soda tax, like in New York or something. That if we start taxing food then and junk food, and we think that's a good thing, but then what happens? when, well, they already think that meat is bad. So now all of a sudden there's going to be restrictions or taxes on meat. So I think where it's going is even more uh, centralization of power with the food system, and it could even go to, well, now we're tracking what you eat, like we even with cashless society, or they even have chips in the UK. They're testing out chips to pay for food with your hand or something. So then they could say, oh well, you've already um, gotten your limit of meat for the week, and we know that meat's bad. The WHO says meat's bad, so you can't buy any more meat. This is what I think is happening, and I don't think it's a conspiracy theory. I mean, some of these big organizations are even talking about how this is the plan. They are trying to do some of these things.
Yeah, it may be the plan, and the bottom line is we are going to determine whether or not they are able to execute that plan, right? So we vote with our forks, where we choose to spend our money. So the fact that we could do that and create regenerative farming, doing the things that you do, just sharing this message, and we have control over it. Because I agree with you. I do believe that's the direction they want to lead us towards, but I don't think it's going to happen. I think there's going to be more people waking up, more conversations like this. Your film's going to get out there and create havoc.
Mhm.
I, I don't know if you remember that film, Root Cause Movie. Have you ever heard of that film
Mm.
about root canals?
Yeah, I did. I watched it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that was a great film too, and that
Mhm.
got taken off of Netflix. It was so controversial.
Mhm.
I don't know if that's going to happen to your film, but it actually did the film a favor because so many people were like, "Oh, what's that film that got taken off?" And they put it on their website as like a rental, and they actually got
Mhm.
more views because of that. So it might be a good thing. But um, so your information is so important. This conversation is so important. Share now, Brian, your websites. I know you do a lot of different things, right? But you have
Mhm.
sapien.org. So share a little bit about that
Mhm.
and about your regenerative farming and what you're doing with that.
Yeah, saving.org is kind of the landing page for it all, and you can link out to Food Lies, so foodlies.org, and that's the film, and we're still on Indiegogo, so we definitely still need more funds. We don't take the money, it goes to the graphic artist and the composer, and we're doing, super custom stuff. And then nosetotail.org is the meat, so that's where we raise it here in Texas, and we ship it out to people, kind of like Butcher Box, but it's all regenerative, grass-fed stuff. And yeah, and then other than that, it's my Instagram stuff's Food Lies, or Twitter, YouTube. Just search anywhere for Food Lies, and that's where I do my content. Yeah.
Yeah, Instagram is food.lies. You got a great Instagram. So for those listening and watching, and you're like, I want to be a part of this. I want to make a difference here. I don't want it to go that direction of a social credit system or them having control over what we get to eat. Donating to your film would be a great thing to do. So we're going to grab a link for that along with all the other resources you just mentioned. We're going to put it down below. If you're watching on YouTube, it's right down below. If you're listening on the podcast, it's down below. Donate whatever you feel is fit because you're going to contribute to this message and to the cause. And then when the film is out there, watch it and share it and get it to as many people as possible. Go to sapien.org, foodlies.org, nosetotail.org. Check the links down below. And also, KetoCon is coming up in a little bit. I'll be speaking there. Brian will be speaking there. Brian lives in Austin. And you're also doing a special event where you have a grand opening for something. Could you share about
Oh,
that?
yeah. So that's kind of part of Sapien. It's called the Sapien Center, Sapien Compound. It's a health center. I'm trying to bring this to real life. We do all this stuff online, and it's so great when, meeting you in Austin a month ago, right? It's like we need a place to make that happen. So I finally got the team together, and we're doing it as a group effort. And we're going to have sort of a soft opening the night before KetoCon on July 7th. So, yeah, please come to that. I'll send out an invite to some people, and you can find that uh, probably on sapien.org if you join the newsletter, and maybe we can include that in something you, yeah.
Yeah, so we'll include that, sapien.org. Just get on his newsletter and you can get updated for that. If you really want to learn more, you could also email us, support@ketocamp.com, and we'll get you a link or more details on that. I'll be there. Me and my fiance will be there. We fly in right before the event starts that same day. And we will also be at KetoCon hanging out. So if you want to learn more about KetoCon, it's ketocon.org. We have a coupon code for you all, which is KetoCamp, to get a nice discount off your ticket. I'll be there all weekend, Thursday to Monday. And Brian, last thing I want to ask you as we wrap up the conversation is the word gratitude, right? I love gratitude. It's a big part of my day to day. I call it vitamin G.
Mhm.
What are you grateful for today, Brian?
Oh, man. Well, other than you having me on the show, which I'm very grateful for, I guess I'm grateful for vitamin D. I'm grateful for the sun. Right before we got on this, I was out getting my sun,
Me
and I'm
too.
just oh, man, I love it. Yeah, it recharged me. I felt better, felt ready for this conversation, and, yeah, I'm so grateful for the I have the flexibility to go outside and get sun every day, and I just wanna encourage everyone to do the same. Even if it's 10 minutes, just go out there, throw your shirt off, get some sun.
Great tip. You're so right. The
Yeah.
sun is healing, and you won't burn if you eat clean and get away from seed oils, and you don't burn. I play basketball for 3 hours outside here in the hot Miami sun. I don't burn. It's this really the seed oils and the high dose fish oil and all that stuff. But I'm grateful for you, Brian. Grateful we met in Austin about a month ago. Grateful to see you again in a few weeks at KetoCon, and Food Lies. Grateful for Food Lies and what you're doing to get the message out there. This is going to be an incredible film. The trailer is amazing. And I want to acknowledge you for the work that you're doing. It's making a big difference. So I'm excited for it.
Mhm.
And thank you so much for coming on my show, my friend.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.